Hello folks, I'm just going to talk about EQ in your DAW today. So I've got a project up here. This is unmixed, so if I open up the mixer you'll see that none of the volumes or pans have been set, and I've just dragged everything down slightly so that we're not peaking loads. So this is what it sounds like unmixed so far. Okay, jolly little poppy kind of tune. So I'm going to have a look at EQing several of the instruments in this. So we're going to look at bass, electric guitar, acoustic guitar. First of all, I'm going to start off by putting some compression on my bass. You can see my other videos for how to go about doing that. So we'll just put a little compressor on the bass. Okay, so there's my compression settings for the bass. One of the questions often asked is, do you compress or EQ first? Some people say it doesn't matter. I always compress first. And that's because if you compress, that is a leveling tool. And if you put an EQ before that and then you want to change your EQ, you'll have to change your compressor settings because the EQ boosts and lowers the volume of certain frequencies. And if you've set up your compressor to compress at those levels and then you change those levels using EQ, you've got to change the compressor. However, if I'm compressing the dry signal first and then I EQ, and I'm going to open the EQ here, then I can still have a compressed signal that's just reacting to the dry signal, and then I can EQ it and send it out to the mix. So here's our bass again. Let's turn up a bit. Okay, so when you open up your EQ plugin, this is the one in Logic, whichever one you've got, the first thing to do is be looking for subtractive methods. So don't immediately start by adding a load of gain to one particular frequency band. If you've got a bass, don't think, oh, I'm going to have to add loads of bass. Look for things that you don't want first. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to boost a frequency, search through the ones that we don't like, and then take them out. So I'll play the track. You can see how I do that. Okay, I'm going to boost that frequency and narrow the Q on it a bit. And then I'm just going to sweep up and down fairly fast. Okay, and there immediately is a frequency that sounds very boxy, very nasally, and that's at 200. And I'm just going to duck that out ever so slightly, maybe 4 to 6 decibels, and narrow the Q a little bit. Let's do it again with the next band up. Okay, there's a very nasty sort of nasal frequency there. I'm going to do exactly the same. Not going to take that one out as much, but just narrow the Q as well. And so I've taken out 2 frequencies that I don't want, and then I'm going to start to look at what I want to put in very gently. So we've got this bass. I obviously may want to put in some bass, and if I want to have some more of the finger sound of that bass, I might put in some highs. So I'm going to try putting in some very gentle EQ on the low end here. So I'm just going to boost this low shelf. I'm going to boost it more than I want, and then I'm going to sweep my frequency through. Okay, I'm going to end up there. I just felt that that was highlighting the low end of the bass more than having the frequency lower down. I'm just capturing what I want, and I'm just tailoring it nicely into this dip of the very boxy frequency that we already saw. Okay, I'm only going to boost it by about 2 to 3. Let's go 2.5, and now I'm just going to try and find a bit of that finger noise of the fingers moving along the strings, of the plucking, and I'm going to have a look up in the high range for that. good. And again, not going to boost it much. So here's my pre-EQ'd but post-compression bass. And here it is with the EQ. And so that's the kind of the rule that we're going to follow, is whenever you go to EQ something in your mix, look for the subtractive elements first. Look for the things that you don't want. Look for the things that you need to take out, because if you just start adding loads of EQ willy-nilly, then it's just going to build up and you start to have a very hot mix. And if you've done any automation, you've got to bring that to, and it just goes on and on. Okay, so let's move on to one of these electric guitars here. So here it is. So that's quite a jangly sound. I'm just going to add in a compressor. So there's my compressor settings. Watch my other videos for the compressor elements. Bit of EQ here. So in the mix, if I want the guitars to be occupying the mid-range of this sound, which is for an electric guitar what you really want, I'm going to immediately assume that I don't want some of the lows, I want some of the mids, and I possibly want some highs. It depends on the sound, but with electric guitars, especially if they're distorted or overdriven, you want this kind of range here in the mids. So let's start off with cutting some of the bass, and I'm going to cut it mainly to take out some of the low rumble if it's been recorded with a mic, or anything that's going to compete with the bass guitar and the kick drum. Okay, that's obviously too much, so I'm going to back off. And I think about 100 maintains the nice lower grittier elements, but stops it interfering with that bass. I'm just going to play the two together. I'll take that low cut out. It just starts to mix together in a slightly unpleasant way for me. Then I'm going to search for that mid boost that I want. I'm again just going to boost up in the mids, narrow the Q, find what I want. So boost that. And I'm just looking for a little bit of bite, a little biting point. And again, not much, between 4 and 6. Widen the Q if you like. And then if you're finding that that is working, but you just need a little bit more sparkle, especially if you haven't got an acoustic guitar in the track, which definitely adds a little bit of sparkle, you can maybe add just a bit of high end at around about 8,000 hertz. So there it is, really boosted, and you can bring that in and out of the mix as you desire. Okay, and that's our electric guitar. Let's just have a little look at our acoustic guitar here. I'm just going to compress it first. Okay, there's my compressor for the acoustic guitar. So for an acoustic guitar, if you've ever played an acoustic guitar, you get a very wide frequency range. The overtones stretch right up into the very high frequencies that we can hear, and beyond what a human can hear. And you often get a nice low rumble. And if the guitar's been recorded with a nice mic, it can sound wonderful. So we're just going to help try and accentuate some of that. Firstly, we're going to go for what we want to cut and remove, and then what we can boost to help it sound nice and sparkly. So again, I'm going to immediately start with taking out some of the lows, because we don't want it competing with the bass guitar. Okay, that's obviously too far. Bring it back. Okay, I think 120 is good there. And like I said, there's a load of really exciting frequencies up in the high range here. So I'm going to boost my high end, and I'm going to sweep that in and out. So I'm going to boost it by quite a lot. I'm going to try and find that nice texture. Okay, I think about 8,500 is good, and I'm just going to see how much we want. Okay, that sounds great to me. There's a little honkiness in the middle of that sound which I want to identify. So as before, I'm going to boost, narrow and sweep. And there it is straight away. So it's 750, and all I'm going to do is cut that and narrow that Q ever so slightly. And here's the finished sound. Here it is without EQ. And here it is with. Okay, let's put that into some context. So I'm just going to mute the guitars that we didn't look at, but I'm going to keep the rest of the instruments in. As I said, this isn't mixed at all. We've just looked at those three very common instruments. Here's how it might sound in the context of a mix with all the instruments. And I'll just play it to you with all of that turned off, compression and EQ. Here it is again. And then I'll just turn them back on while it's playing. And you can hear that just brings it to life, adds a bit more sparkle and stops some of the frequencies competing with each other. That's all we're going to cover in EQ for those three common instruments. Hope that was useful. Pass it on if you did find it useful. Check out other videos for these 10-minute tutorials. Take care, folks.